Welcome to the Insight Podcast. I'm your host, Seth, the CMO at Syte, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mike, the CEO at Syte. Today, we're super excited to dive into a topic that we've been hyping up for quite a lot of time now, email marketing. And today, we're joined by our head of email at Syte, Bimpe. Welcome to the show, Bims.
Thank you for having me, Seth and Mike. I'm so excited to be here.
Go by a real name, Bimpalicious. Let's go.
Bimpalicious.
I go by
Awesome.
many names.
Great. In this episode, we're going to be covering everything you need to know about email strategy. We'll be breaking down the differences between newsletters and automated emails, and we'll even be diving deep into the cart abandonment emails and the crucial role they play in recovering lost sales. We're also going to explore the good, the bad, and the pitfalls of email marketing, and we're going to be going through everything you need to avoid to make sure your campaigns are successful. Plus, we'll be discussing the best times to send your emails, how to experiment with different campaigns, and which strategies actually drive conversions. By the end of this episode, you'll have a solid framework that you can implement in your own business to improve your email marketing game. Let's dive in, guys.
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest things with email marketing is I think a lot of people don't always know where to start, and they end up getting confused with like who they're sending to, when they're sending to. And one of my favorite parts of doing email marketing was kind of the psychology behind it. So when you're sending stuff to an audience, you need to make sure that A, you're providing value, and B, you're considering the time and content of the emails. So it's like, how far and wide do you want something to go? Do you want people to feel like they're special and only send something to a VIP audience? Do you want to make sure that if you're running a sale, that as many people in your database as possible have it? So you need to make sure that you're A, considering what the content is and who it's going to be most valuable to, and then B, think about how you want it to be delivered. So I think
Awesome.
The first step to start off is, what kind of emails am I going to be running? And where a lot of people kind of hit the first hurdle, it's like, what is the difference between sending a newsletter versus doing, especially for e-commerce brands, doing an automated email, which is something that we love to do here. We love a triggered email in this house. So basically the idea is that a newsletter is more of a content and engagement based mailer. It's essentially building and fostering the relationship that you have with your audience and with your database, and sharing the information of updates, changes in the company, website changes, new products, all of that ongoing stuff. Almost like a newsletter will kind of always be evergreen. So you consider what's happening in your environment and make sure that you're conveying that message in a way that's valuable to your customers. So there's a few different ways that you can do that, but I think that the perfect mix is kind of mixing between a product-based mailer, so highlighting something that you're selling, if you're an e-com or service-based brand, and then thinking about your engagement mailer, so something that provides value to the audience. So that's it for newsletters. And then we think about automated
just a quick
mailers.
question, just for I think everyone's understanding, just your history and experience, the Great Bumps, is
Okay.
so before, not your background, but more your email history. So
Yeah.
what I typically see, I just want to kind of see from your point of view, the companies are doing there's one of two things that a company can do on email, and they can do both, of course. But one option, exactly as you described, you can do bulk email, and that's what I think people call newsletter email in their own world. And the second one is event-based mail, which is basically personalized email based on certain events or criteria that they've fulfilled on the site, right?
Yeah.
When you start working with someone on email, how many guys do you see in the e-commerce landscape that are only doing bulk mail? Like how many guys are doing the event-based mail, the stuff that I think can actually like probably move the needle more?
I think especially in the South African market, there's not a lot of people that are running event-based emails. I think as emails gotten more popular, there are people that have like the abandoned cart mailer, which is like, if there's levels to automated emails that you should be sending, the first one that everyone always thinks of is the abandoned cart email. So I think especially as website software gets more and more advanced, people see it and they kind of think that it's like a click, set up and go with whatever standard default version of the abandoned cart mailer exists on their WooCommerce or Shopify. But for a lot of places, they really only consider the newsletter as like the be all and end all of email, when there are actually so many different ways that you can utilize email in automated ways, like based off of triggers.
Got it. So you say like in terms of like top level to bottom level, bottom level they're doing no email. Just above that tier, they're doing newsletter mail. Just above that tier, they're doing newsletter email and one event-based mail, so like a cart abandonment mail.
Yeah,
And
pretty much.
then I wouldn't say top tier, but like
To
where
the top.
guys are mostly not doing, but like starting to get to the top tier is they're doing all that stuff plus all the other event-based mail options that exist.
Yeah.
Is that kind of
And I think that one of the best things about event-based mailers is like there are a lot of them that are applicable to a lot of different industries and work for a lot of different products. But I always say that email marketing is not a one size fits all. So getting the feedback from like our clients, for example, it's like, oh, you think that when people use this product after they run out in like 2 months, then that is the good time for them to send them like a cross-sell email or a replenish email, something to remind them. Oh, you feel like when somebody buys this, they usually purchase a different product that like matches it well. Okay, cool. Let's cross-sell specifically to someone that bought A that might like C, because that's how your audience works.
got it. So maybe Bims, give us a nice education into maybe the different types of event-based triggers or event-based mails that exist. So we know cart abandonment email. So if anyone doesn't know, someone's got to the cart, they haven't continued the purchase, and they get a cart abandonment email. What are the other types of event-based mail that are worth considering?
Okay, so cart management, like we said, is very popular. But what a lot of people don't know to implement is, depending on where your store is hosted, you can also set up a browse abandonment email. So this email is basically triggered. It's kind of like the step before the cart is abandoned. So when a client has their email registered on your website, so you can track their shopping habits, we're able to basically see. Oh, guys, I'm so sorry, it's so loud.
There's always a siren that goes on in this podcast. You can't. This is where we live.
I think at this point it's really to pull your attention. You should be focusing on these sirens. Exactly.
So before somebody adds a product to their cart, they're clicking around the website, they're shopping, and maybe they don't actually get to the point where they've added some products to their cart so that the abandoned cart flow triggers. So something that you should be doing, if you can, if you have the capabilities on your side, is setting up a browse abandonment trigger. So basically, this is a single email that goes out to someone roughly between 1 and 3 hours after they've viewed a last product on your website, but they haven't started the cart abandonment. So the browse abandonment basically catches them at that point before, where they were maybe looking at something, and the messaging you want to include in something like this is, oh, we saw you taking a look at this, be sure, come back and take another look, add it to your cart. And then if they come back, they'll add it to their cart. Maybe they don't finish completing the checkout, then they would get the cart abandonment workflow. So you're making sure that you're really reaching them when and where they're at.
Got it.
So
just a
that,
question. And one question I've had a lot, one concern I've had from a lot of clients, and tell me, I would love to hear from you, the gospel itself here is, I think the concern sometimes around when people hear about a browse abandonment email, and I guess general event-based mails as a whole, because they're event-based, meaning that a user had to perform a certain action, i.e. view a product and then abandon, or view the cart and abandon, and then they get a mail post that. Some clients have a concern is it too creepy? That I've just viewed the cell phone, now I get a mail, like, are people going to be turned off? In the history of the 1 million mails you have sent, have you ever had a client say, how did you get my email? This is too creepy, stop emailing me. Settle it for me now, and please say, no, that's never happened.
So to debunk this theory, so an event-based email can only be sent to someone that has a registered email on your website, on your web backend, a contact that has been put into your web backend based off of a previous purchase or subscribe to email specifically. So for example, if somebody is browsing a website and clicking through products in incognito mode, they're not going to get any of those emails because they essentially don't exist. So yeah, I think that browse abandonment and cart abandonment emails actually have a really low unsubscribe rates. And I think that one of the reasons because of that is because you're giving them content that's like a benefit to them. It's a product that they were viewing, that they were interested in. You're doing them a favor, actually. You're reminding them about all the lovely things that they were taking a look at.
They should say thank you. They shouldn't say this is creepy. They should just say thank you.
I think in that sense, another thing that's useful about the browse abandonment email is that the way that we set up our emails, at least, that like the best practice for setting up emails is making sure that people are not being bombarded with emails. So if somebody does they abandon a browser and get a browse abandonment email today, within the next 16 hours, even if they abandon their carts, they're not going to receive the carts abandonment flow, because who wants to receive email 1, email 2, email 3? So it's called like a smart sending tactic, which is something that Klaviyo, which is the email marketing software that we have, use just to make sure that the people aren't being like annulled with emails.
I think just as now that we've touched on email software, what are the differences? I know we've got one of the bigger players out there, MailChimp, now Klaviyo. What is the big difference between a newsletter priority emailer and a event-based emailer, or email software, sorry, should I say?
That is a good question. So, like I said earlier, because email marketing really isn't one size fits all, there's B2B, there's B2C, there's newsletters, there's triggers, everything. So I think that when you're going through the different platforms are because it's like buying a phone. There's a million phones out there, but you need to figure out which one's like the perfect one for you. So I would say the big difference is you need to think about what your email marketing goals are. So for example, if you're a client that has a mostly service-based company, like that's what you're selling is services, you really need to think about the fact that for certain platforms, you would be paying for software that you might not essentially be able to use, because not all websites are a perfect fit for all the different email marketing softwares, and not the goal that you might have, which is providing informational content to your clients. They're not going onto a website and viewing products. They want to learn more about your company and the services you offer. Then you need to think, okay, am I going to be on a platform that has amazing functionality, but not necessarily functionality that's going to be valuable to you? In that case, an example of that would be MailChimp is really good for newsletters because the cost per use is a lot lower, considering the fact that on a platform like Klaviyo or Customer.io or Drip, you're paying for a world of functionality that's not necessarily built for a service or B2B based company. Whereas with the functionality of automated emails on something like MailChimp is still there, but it's not as advanced, I would say, as something like Klaviyo that's been built basically for e-commerce and to make sales. Whereas for companies that are more, I'd say, tech based, that are really looking for that more like elevated API, super intense and targeted email marketing kind of technique, you would go for something like Customer.io, but that is not something that you want to play with unless you have a web developer in your back pockets. But when it works, it can be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very intricate.
Effective?
Intricate.
Intricate.
Yeah, you can put together the journey of your customer on Customer.io very intricately, but it is a very complicated system. So it's not something that you kind of just jump into.
And Bims, I wanted to ask you, you obviously have a background, a degree in the psychology and the dark arts of manipulation, all that type of stuff. Like, what have you found to, just in terms of copy, subject lines, like, is there anything that stands out for you, like, this drives the best behavior, gets the best open rates? Yeah, anything like that?
Yeah. So I think, like I said, every company and every audience is different, which is why testing and playing around with the different ways that you communicate with your audience is very important. I think that sometimes it also makes a lot of sense to make sure that what you're saying is aligned with your brand and with your audience. So if like you're a company that sells gym wear and everything is like super hard and fast, then you can use the all caps in your subject line, you can use the bold text on your messages, you can use the sharper call to actions. Whereas for example, if you sell makeup and have like a very feminine brand, you want to use the like hi sweetie tone and voice, but you do want to make sure that in your subject lines, for example, that your customer knows what they're getting and why they should open it. So something that's important to do is like piquing interest, and you want to make sure that your main point of your email, whether that's getting them to learn about something or getting them to reach out and give you feedback about something, you want them to know why they're opening the email, and you need to give them a reason to do that in the subject line.
Question I get a lot. So I think most e-commerce platforms, whether it be Shopify, WooCommerce, whatever, Magento, PrestaShop, they have like an automated, or go for Shopify's one, like they have an automated cart abandonment mail, right? I think it's one mail that goes off when they abandon the cart. I think that's their sole and only automated platform native event-based mail. What's wrong with it? Why should people do something better? Why should they stop being average? Tell us, Bimpe.
So I think that the mistake that a lot of people make is when they see that, because it's one of the functionalities on like Shopify, for example, it's like, oh, set up this email, and they literally just click switch on, and they don't really take a look to see what content is going out here. Is this messaging aligned with my brand's tone of voice? Are the colors right? Or is the subject line engaging enough? Like, I think that level of creativity that the standard defaults, like single abandoned cart email has, is men. Do you know what I mean? And you're not really engaging with your audience in a way that you would want to be engaged with. I always say when we start off with new clients on email, I'm like, what kind of emails do you guys like? Are there any companies that do email that you like love? Let's be able to replicate, do something similar for you. Because if I'm looking in my inbox and I'm like, if you saw my inbox, you'd lose your mind, because I'm subscribed to a million different companies, because I'm always looking for inspiration for, oh, I really like how this is formatted. Oh, I really like the way that they put the call to action higher or lower, or repeated it and sold this to me in this way, because I know that for our clients, I want to be able to emulate something that I like, and so that their audiences will also like it. So I think that specifically with something like a default kind of automated email that's kind of just set up, you also need to make sure that you are testing it so that you can see your audience's reactivity. So I'll give you an example, like the Shopify single abandoned cart email. It works, right? It's there. It's definitely there. But even with clients that we've had that have had that single email running on Shopify versus when we bring them onto Klaviyo, when we do like the whole abandoned cart workflow where they're touching them at different touch points. If somebody buys the product after the first email, they're not going to get the second one, but we have that like follow up. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yes.
a bit more intentional, which is something
Yes.
that I think that when you just press play on a standard abandoned cart email that exists, you're missing.
And then just
And then
guiding our e-commerce owners out there and anyone that wants to set up these numbers. At Syte, we live in the analytics and in the data. So what are some of those points and what are some of the metrics that you should be looking at? Your reply rates, what are those metrics? What should those percentages be to know that you're good, you're bad, it's really bad, you really need to improve? What should you really be focusing on when you're setting up these mails?
So I think, like I said, it is different for different industries. I think that the way that we run our email KPIs for our ecom clients is based off of revenue, right? Because you want to make sure that you're making money. The good thing about email is that even though people think that like email is dead, how often do you check your email? So if you're in it, think about how useful it can be to meet people in a space that they're already always in. Another thing that's really nice about email is that it has a really good ROI. Like the cost that you spend on a platform versus the cost that you make back, specifically in the ecom case, can be really, really competitive, even when you compare it to like things like paid social or Google, etc. So when you're setting up your email, you need to have a guideline, a base guideline of what your success metrics look like. So for example, the average click-through rate, well, I'm going to talk about click-through, open rate, and bounce rate. And then there's deliverability as well, but that's kind of the inverse of bounce rate. So the first thing you want to think about is how many people are opening your email. Like I said, it differs from industry to industry, but on average, you should have between 17 and 25% of people opening a standard email. But once you engage with your audience, depending on how engaged your audience is, you can see where your baseline is and how far below or above that should be worrying, like concerning. So you definitely don't want to go more than 2% either way, but an average would be between 17 and 25% of your email. Okay, and the next thing you want to think about is the click-through rate. So something that seriously affects the click-through rate is where you are putting your call to actions. What do you want the person to do when they've opened this email? Which is why it's important to make sure that you have a call to action quite high up in some parts of your email, like they call it below the fold, which is the point where on desktop or on mobile, when you open the email, what's in that first little bit of space? Are you telling them what they need to know and what you want them to do? Because at the end of the day, not everyone is going to scroll a million miles down to the bottom of the email before they realize what they're supposed to be doing, which is why I need to catch them at the top. So for click-through rates, it's important to have a click-through rate between 3 and 5% on your email. And this is something that you can see across whether you're doing e-com or you're doing newsletters and B2B emails. And then the next thing you want to look at is your bounce rate, which is basically thinking about how updated and cleaned your audience list is. So for example, sometimes people have given an email that's been inactive and it doesn't send. And you want to make sure that that bounce rate is below 2%, because if email providers start seeing that your address is bouncing a lot, they can start considering it spam, because it might be a thing of your emails are picking up, are triggering spam filters. And then your deliverability is kind of the inverse of your bounce rate. So for example, if your bounce rate is at 2%, 2% of your emails bounce, then your deliverability would be 98%. So that's the percentage of emails that are getting through to inboxes and not being rejected as spam filters.
And the big one, revenue. How much of someone's revenue must come from your email?
So for ecom brands, you should comfortably be able to get above 5% of your total revenue from email. And on the better end, ideal would be between 10 and 8% of your total revenue coming from email, which is nice because it kind of ebbs and flows. So, for example, having a monetary value on the amount of money you can expect from email isn't actually always realistic, especially considering the amount of communication you do with your audience. So, for example, if you're a company that sells swimsuits and it's the middle of winter, and your profit inevitably dips, you can't say, oh, but in summer we made 50,000 Rand from email and now we're only making 30,000 Rand. And it's like, well, in summer you were making 500,000 Rand in sales and in winter you're only making.
So on the low end, like you're doing bad, what you're saying, if you're below 5%, you're doing bad.
You're doing something incredibly wrong.
Seasonality out of it, you're doing something really wrong. 10% kind of, it's not a stretch goal, but you should be at least at 10% of your overall revenue through email. And yes. But better than that. But obviously, 15-20% is amazing, but it's not, that's you're at the top end of email marketers.
Yeah.
That's the case.
Definitely.
And then Bimps, just to end it off, for someone that after listening to this whole episode thus far is still unconvinced about email and the effectiveness of email, and they're like, oh no, it's an old school tactic. It's still, I wouldn't rather be on LinkedIn. I'd rather be on Instagram. I'd rather be on Facebook. Why is email still king?
I think that email is king for two reasons, right? One, your return on investment is likely going to be much higher than you might think, depending on what other paid platforms you're using. And either I think email is a really good way to utilize connecting with your audience by giving them content that they feel is valuable. So for example, looking at automated emails, there are so many different variations and touch points that you can give to your audience. And like we said, it's kind of like you're doing them a favor. So I think that an important thing to note here would be go to your email and really think about how often you're taking in that kind of content. It's like seeing a billboard out. When you drive around and you see content on the side of the street, you might not look at it, but you're looking at something in front of your face almost all the time. Why wouldn't you want to look at it? Why wouldn't you want to engage with it? Especially if it's something that's valuable. So that's probably the most important.
Exactly. I was looking at a few stats earlier. I think the average professional spends around about 2 to 3 hours a day on email. And when people go into their emails, it might be a little bit high, might be a bit high on that end. But when people go into their emails, they're not going there for fun. They're going there with an intention either to do work or to see what newsletters are coming out and then take action on those. And I think that's what's missed a lot, is that people think, oh no, email's still just a waste of time. But you're spending a lot of your time there. So grabbing someone's attention there, especially when it's so low cost and so effective, is something I'd recommend every e-commerce owner. And even if you have a service-based business, I would definitely recommend either running a newsletter or action-based. Just do it. Awesome.
I love it. Good one, guys. Bimps, it was a great honor.
That was so much fun.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of the Insight Podcast. I hope you found this episode insightful. And I'm really happy that we finally got to do this episode on emailers. And I hope you now know the difference between newsletters and event-based mailers and what platforms to choose and whether you should be using MailChimp or Klaviyo or whatever platform there is out there. I hope you now have a little bit more insight to actually go and choose the right platform for your business. And I hope you can go and generate some revenue on email. I hope you can go and say, okay, someone in my team is going to go do this, or I'm going to go hire an agency to go do this, because I need my 5, 8, 10, 20% of revenue generated on email. I can't miss out on this, because you really shouldn't. It's 2024. Email has been around for a long time. You cannot be waiting on it. So go and take action. That's it for today. See you next week, Thursday.